Hello, Americans. I'm Kent McNall. It's Constitution time. Take two. And I'd like to thank Miss Ann for coming down and letting me know that. I was not on the air, and I hope sincerely that I am now. Today is January 27th, 2021. And we have a very interesting show for you this evening. I have my guest, Stephen Steck, and we're going to talk about the filibuster, the thing that many of us hear so much about, but maybe don't understand fully, and certainly don't understand why it has stopped up our government the way it has for so long. But before I jump into that, I want to talk a little bit about the impeachment. My initial pushback on the impeachment was the timing of the impeachment. I felt that since it is appropriate to impeach a previous president, a past president who is no longer in office, that it could be done at any time, and that perhaps there were more important things to do at first. But it is absolutely necessary to impeach this president. It is absolutely necessary. And those who are saying, primarily the people on the right in the Senate, who are saying that it is unconstitutional to impeach a president who is not the sitting president are simply not thinking it through. What they're actually saying is that for the last months of a president's term, he or she, Democrat or Republican, should be able to do whatever they want to do with absolute impunity from any kind of prosecution, including the prosecution that was specifically created for a sitting president, impeachment, and for the president in any part of his term, not just the first part, but right up until the very end. And what these folks are actually saying is that a sitting president or a president should be able to do whatever he wants to do in the final months, and it's months of his term, simply because an impeachment cannot be called and carried through in those final months. And certainly one of the things that absolutely means is exactly what this case is illustrating, that includes complete and utter disregard for the results of an election, attempts to overturn the election, including with violent insurrection. This case could not be a better poster child of exactly why it is absolutely constitutional to try the past president for his actions in his last months of office. And if we don't do that, and if he is not in fact convicted, the signal we're sending to every Trump wannabe and every Trump acolyte from here on is that, hey, come on in, do whatever you want to keep yourself in office. Break any law at all, because we don't have time to impeach you. So therefore, there's no penalty whatsoever. There is no way that anyone can say that that's what our founders intended, because that's not what our founders intended. They intended for that man to be impeached, and impeached he must be, and convicted he must be. And anyone who says differently is simply being a partisan hack. Give me just a moment, and we'll convert over to our subject for this evening with Mr. Stephen Steck. Good evening, Stephen.
Good evening.
How are you?
Not too bad. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining us this evening. I'm in real hopes that everyone can hear us. When you have the mute button on, you tend not to be heard.
Usually.
So, Stephen, our topic is the filibuster, which is something that we have heard a lot more about in the past few terms of presidents than at any time in our history before. But I thought you might kick us off by talking a bit about that history. How how did the filibuster come about in the first place? And maybe we should talk a little bit about what it actually is.
Certainly. So the filibuster kind of came about, most historians agree, by accident. So back in 1806, 1805, Vice President Aaron Burr uh, was suggesting to the Senate that their rule book was just too convoluted. There's too much nuance here, too many places where things could be open to wild interpretation. And so he was suggesting they clean it up. And sort of most people agree by chance, he pointed at the previous question rule. And up until that point, the House and the Senate both had the previous question rule in their books, which is basically a let's stop debate and just vote on the topic at hand. All it requires is a simple majority, at which point it goes to a vote. So in the next session of Congress, they accepted that. They removed the previous question, as well as a bunch of other things from the rule book to clean it up. The effects of this weren't felt for another 31 years until 1836 or 1837, when the first filibuster happened. But yeah, with the Senate definitely just didn't entirely understand the ramifications of what they were doing when they changed the rules.
Seems
And
to
it used
happen
to
a
be
lot,
that,
I have to say, and seems to be showing up today.
yep, definitely. It's hard to predict the future, but that was one place where things definitely kind of went sideways.
So
Um,
mechanically, just to dump in here and actually talk about what a filibuster is. Originally, a filibuster played against the rule that a senator can stand up and talk for as long as they want. And essentially,
mhm.
the filibuster says that for as long as a senator or a group of senators can and want to talk, they can delay the vote on any bill. And that at some
Mhm.
point, essentially the Senate will give up and say, okay, the filibuster wins, and we're not going to have a vote on this issue, whatever that issue is.
So originally, even in the 1830s, 1840s, the filibuster was usually just a delaying tactic, so that senators had time to convince other senators. It wasn't until the 20th century that uh, it sort of became partisan, and it became accepted that not everything was going to get a vote. Um, it, Before that, even things that were filibustered eventually got voted on. Um, it was just often a lot longer of a time.
But even in my lifetime, I remember seeing filibusters in action, senators reading back the record of the meetings of the senators into the record again, just to make time go by. They were still actually doing the filibuster, speaking, delaying, making everybody go home, etc.
Yep. Yeah. Up until so technically the rule about a silent filibuster was introduced in 1975, but even that wasn't widely used until starting in the late 90s, um, where you could inform your majority leader or minority, whoever your leader was, that you wanted to put a hold on the bill. Um, it was unfortunately anonymous, so any senator can tell their leader that they want a hold on the bill, and it, it's anonymous as to who puts a hold on it. But at that point, it's a silent filibuster, and it will require a cloture vote or a cloture motion to actually come to the floor for a vote.
So before you talk about the cloture vote, you're saying that what they used to have to actually do by talking, by passing the hours, by saying something, they now no longer have to do that. All they have to do is inform the leader of the other party that they intend to do a filibuster, and nobody actually has to get up and say a word.
Yeah. Yeah. It used to be you'd have to stand up there. I think the record is 20 odd hours. You would need to stand up there, and as soon as you left the podium, your speaking time was done, and unless somebody else granted you more time, that was it. You were done speaking.
Now, this seems like a ridiculous waste of time. And essentially, it became, if it was not originally intended in the accidental creation in 1806, it became a way for the minority to stop a bill that the majority or a majority might want to pass simply by making sure that it was never voted on.
Mm-hmm.
So now let's talk about the cloture vote, because that can end the filibuster, correct?
Yeah, so that was brought about in 1917 because it was the issue of a small group. There was 12 senators at the time that were very anti-war, and they were very opposed to a bill that would allow merchant ships to arm themselves. And the 12 of them combined could easily filibuster indefinitely. So the Senate came up with the cloture rule, which at that point, I think it was 2/3 of the Senate in attendance would need to vote. So somebody would make a cloture motion. 2/3 of the Senate would need to vote to approve that. And instead of the previous question rule, which immediately just goes to vote, it puts a hard limit on the amount of time left to debate. And that hard limit is kind of up to whoever makes the motion or the majority leader. It's not always perfectly set. There's some written things about it being up to a week, but it can be longer or shorter depending on how it's accepted.
So I believe the current cloture vote can be accomplished with 60 votes, which is not 2/3.
Yep.
But whether it's
Yeah.
66 or 60, in the partisan environment of the last many years, that's essentially an impossible number to reach. It's impractical. It essentially means that the minority can stop almost any issue with a filibuster. And that is what's happened in practice. So, would you say that's accurate?
Yep. Yeah. It definitely allows a group of 40 senators minimum to stop the vote on any topic that they deem that they don't want to vote on. They don't want their voting on record on, or they are concerned that they wouldn't have the votes. And there have been times where that number has changed. So there was a short period of time where it was a simple majority that could pass the cloture motion, but that was pretty quickly put back to 60 at that point. And there are a couple of loopholes in the cloture motion rules, but one of the big ones is it doesn't apply to discussions on Senate rules. So if anybody wants to discuss the rules, including the filibuster of the Senate, that can be filibustered indefinitely and no cloture motion can be made.
But a 2/3 vote can still kill that.
Mm-mm. So
No.
one determined senator can prevent the addition of a change of Senate rules, at which point they go by the rules of previous Congress until the new rules are adopted.
So what you're saying is that these insane rules, and in the case of a filibuster, an accidental rule going all the way back to 1806, or a rule with accidental implications, cannot be changed if even one senator objects.
Chooses to filibuster the filibuster rule. Yeah.
Now, in that case, if let's say there was only one senator objecting, would they be able to also still do the silent filibuster, or would they have to get up and talk for 20 hours?
The hold motion, it can by default be overridden with a cloture motion. So they would need to stand up there for however many hours.
So the reality is that these ridiculous rules that the Senate has created, which is of essentially put the Senate in a position to gum up all the works of government, which is exactly what's been happening, cannot even be changed, can barely be changed by the Senate themselves.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's only gotten more commonly used. There's no the threat of filibuster. The kind of only records we easily have access to is how many cloture motions were made and passed, and so how many bills ended up dead due to filibuster or eventually got voted on or got dropped. But we don't know how many never made it to the floor because of the threat of filibuster.
Now, I contend very much that the oversight of each branch of government by the other should allow the administration, the president, to do something about this, because essentially the Senate has created a jumble of these ridiculous rules that have given them incredible power to stop legislation. And that's exactly what we've seen in the last many years, especially the last 4. Legislation doesn't even have to be considered because of Senate rules. Senate rules that put the minority in power. Senate rules that put far too much power in the hands of the majority leader. And so really the filibuster is just one of these ridiculous rules. But strangely, the minority leader, McConnell, gave up some leverage with the filibuster in allowing the Democrats to actually come to the power of the majority. I mean, he actually stepped aside a little bit and let them do that because he gave up the 60 vote requirement to override a filibuster. Or is that too simplistically stated?
He gave up the argument that there shouldn't that rule shouldn't be changed. So at this point,
he was trying to change it.
Well, the Democrats were trying to change that rule to be a simple majority or just get rid of the filibuster entirely. And he was saying that he intended to argue forever about that so that it would never pass. There was some discussions behind the scenes, and he has since said that he's willing to have the Democrats draft up the new rules for Congress, but they'll still need to be voted on by the Senate. So if the Democrats want to change it down to a simple majority, it will require a simple majority to approve the new rules. So the Democrats aren't through the woods yet with getting rid of the filibuster or even reducing it, but it's one step closer.
But at this point, at least they are actually formally taking charge of the Senate, chairmanships, etc.
Yep.
Even though this issue is still outstanding. Is that correct?
Yeah.
So what would it take to actually get rid of it? And by the way, my view on the filibuster is that, like so many of our other norms, it has been completely overridden from something that was almost never used to something that is used all the time to really prevent any progress of any kind from being made at a time when we so badly need to make progress. So what will it take right now to change the filibuster rules or get rid of the filibuster completely?
It would take I don't think it would be unanimous consent, but it would take the Democrats putting forth a new set of rules that get rid of the filibuster for this Congress, because each Congress they establish their set of rules. So in 2 years they'll establish a new set of rules, but it would take them putting forth a set of rules that explicitly prohibit the filibuster, that add back in the previous motion question or change the cloture motion to be more in line with the previous motion or previous question motion. And then it would take a simple majority of the Senate, as well as nobody wanting to filibuster the rules changes.
Very difficult.
Yeah.
And as you
Yeah, especially
mentioned,
since
there are even Democrats that are against some of these rule changes.
Yep. I mean, the Democrats definitely did use the filibuster in the Trump administration. A cloture motion was made 466 times during the Trump administration, and 40-ish of them ended up not getting approved. So at least 40 bills were killed during the Trump administration by the filibuster, which the Democrats will remember that and may not want to get rid of that particular power, stopgap, whatever you want to call it, that they would have if they lose power.
So I think it's very clear, and I don't think many would argue that the Senate has used these rules to really dramatically increase their power over the last many years, and it didn't really even start with McConnell. He's definitely got it down to a science, but what is the oversight capability of the other branches of government? Well, clearly, the courts could strike something down, but does the president have the ability through an executive order to force change in some of these areas, or is that an area that could be explored?
I think it could be explored, but I sort of doubt that the president would have a ton of say as to what happens with the Senate's proceedings and how things happen in the Senate.
Well, here's my point. If the president declared himself king, well, like somebody recently tried to do, uh, certainly the other branches of government would be able to do something about that. I mean, that's what we're talking about here. The Senate using its rules to say, yes, not only do we have all this extra power, but we ourselves can't even take this power away from ourselves. I mean, it's kind of insane if you think about it.
Yeah. If anything, the vice president would be the one who might have some legal standing to force changes in rules. As the president of the Senate, she could take that role back away from the Senate and try to force some rule changes that way. It's unclear as to how well that would stand up in court, but it's definitely that, in my mind, feels a little more likely than the president being able to do anything.
I'm definitely a fan of the vice president reimposing the power of the vice president to be the president of the Senate. That was the original construct of the Constitution. Of course, if we tried to do that today, there would be a lot of people saying that's unconstitutional. That's the way it was written in the Constitution, and perhaps the Protem Construct is the less constitutional. The thing I'm interested in trying to be constructive is just simply, is there a way out of this box? If the Senate creates rules that completely change the power balance between the branches of government, that doesn't seem like something that should be able to fly. And it's not only flying, but it's dragging us down.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I can only assume we'll see more filibusters happen if nothing gets changed in the rules over the next 2 years.
I know
So
that.
I definitely,
Yeah, go ahead, please.
I definitely think something needs to happen, whether it's a court challenge of is the cloture rule allowed, um, or vice president stepping in and trying to exert some kind of power, which would probably also end up in the courts. But
So just to kind of recap, the filibuster was something that was accidentally created in 1806 by the passage of kind of a unrelated act or rule. Uh, didn't really didn't go into use for quite a good number of years until after it was created. Was used very seldom through the 19th and most of the 20th century. Started to come more into use and partisan use uh, in the 70s, 80s, 90s. Got automated somewhere along the line, so they didn't even have to do the speaking component. They just had to say, hey, we're going to filibuster, but had the same chilling effect on uh, getting a vote on a bill, and is now pretty much used constantly to make sure that bills that either side does not want even to have debate on or a vote on get killed. Is that a fair
yep.
summation?
Yeah, it became a lot easier to filibuster kind of quietly and secretly when they enacted the two-track rule in 1970. Because before then, if you were filibustering something, that
No
was it.
other
The Senate
business.
couldn't work. Yep.
Yeah.
It was just, okay, well, we're shutting down until this filibuster's done. But as soon as they implemented the two-track rule, suddenly most people don't even realize that at all times something is being filibustered.
In modern parlance, this is basically the think and chew gum rule for the Senate. Is that right?
Yeah.
So, but this is an interesting part of the filibuster history. So the two-track rule took us out of the mode where a filibuster could stop all other Senate business, which obviously put a lot more pressure on everybody if there was a filibuster taking place,
Mm-hmm.
and meant that, well, we have this filibuster in progress, but we can also continue to do other business at the same time. Essentially, put the filibuster on hold, do other business, come back to the filibuster. Is that right?
Yeah. So basically, as long as whatever is being quote unquote filibustered at that point gets a time slot every day. So from 9:30 to 10:30, we will discuss Bill 4893 that's being actively filibustered. Then they could, from 10 o'clock onward, work on other things. Um, and you can have as many things on the, because it's not actually a two-track. That's just kind of what they refer to it as. You can have 40 bills with 5-minute time slots to discuss, um, and have all 40 of them be filibustered.
So it just held up indefinitely.
Yep.
So just for a minute, let's talk about any legitimate aspect of a filibuster to try to make sure that the minority has rights. I think a concern of having no filibuster would be that a completely united, totally partisan majority could really push through whatever legislation that they wanted, that had come obviously from the House. And that, so if you
Mm-hmm.
had both the House and the Senate, you could really much more easily push through a lot of legislation. So, when one party has a majority everywhere, there are ramifications to that. Um, and the filibuster kind of takes away the need to try to really get people to vote their conscience, not just with their party, because the minority can so easily filibuster. Is there some legitimacy to the idea of protecting the minority from those situations? Or should they really have to go back to the way it used to be, prior to the 1970s, where you've got to get people to vote their conscience, not just their party. This seems to be contributing to the ultimate partisanship.
Yeah, I think it definitely allows a lot of people to not have to put their votes down on paper. So they can just toe the party line, and wherever their constituents might be upset, that bill's probably been filibustered anyway. They don't need to worry about it. And that's for both sides. Like there's some laws that would upset Democratic constituents that the Democratic senators may vote for if it wasn't filibustered, and there's some that would upset Republican constituents that the Republican senators might vote for if it's not filibustered. But as long as things can be filibustered so easily, you just don't have to put your vote down for things that might be hotly contested. As for allowing the minority to have a say, to give them the time to say their piece, having the time delay of the cloture motion, some amount of time is probably a good amount. So if you want to continue to debate a topic for an additional 3, 7, however many days, having that seems reasonable to me. There's a lot of things that should probably have a lot of discussions on the ramifications of the bill.
Well, so many bills are now, really hundreds of bills rolled into one. That's not a illegitimate point at all.
Yeah.
What if you just had, if you could wave your magic wand, would you get rid of the filibuster today?
I would probably decrease the cloture down to 51, and put in rules saying that it has to stay at that level. It can't be modified other than by a supermajority vote.
It seems so improbable that they could get a rule change like that under the conditions you described, that even one senator who objects could stop it from being changed.
Yep.
Okay. I know that you really dug through some history on this. Were there any interesting filibusters from history that you thought were worth talking about a little bit?
Most of the sort of ones that get pointed out in the history books are kind of truly terrible filibusters. That the most popular ones pointed out are things like filibustering the civil rights acts, and things that nowadays we look at and we say, oh wow, how was anyone disagreeing with that? But some of the longest filibusters were about giving equal rights to people.
I believe it was Strom Thurmond that had a very famous, full 24-hour filibuster back in the day against civil rights, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
Stephen Steck, as always, thank you so much for jumping on here with us.
Certainly. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Always appreciate your contribution. Sorry about the audio problem at the beginning, folks. Thank you for joining us on Constitution Time. Please stay safe, stay clear of COVID. It's still a very big threat, and we'll see you next time.